Thanks again joining for us for this webinar. I'm seeing a lot of familiar names on the participants list. Happy that you joined us again. This week's topic, running the race. So now we get the wheel spinning. Briefly reminding on what we have been discussing on the previous webinars. So we have been starting the whole series on what makes startups fundable, and if that's one part that you want or are questioning, feel free to go through all the webinars or the first webinar on our website and also the other webinars. Then we have been also discussing around specifying around how to make sure that the money that you're looking at you're using it wisely and you can get it from the investors. A couple of weeks back, we discussed about how to prepare the materials for running the race. And finally, today, we are on the phase that we can start contacting investors and running the process. So today's agenda, what I want to discuss with you is around, well, first of all, this topic of fundraising is a momentum game. And I will tell a little bit more about that next, and then after talking about the momentum, why that's important in the fundraising, then going more into details of how to run the process effectively in a batch process way, and finally the latter part of the session discussing what to do in detail on different funnel steps. It's a big topic, so I'll try to focus on the main learnings I have had helping startups to fundraise. So momentum game, why that's so important is that the investors are really great at sniffing, are you going to make it or not? And I do think this wheels example is quite illustrating. I was trying to find yesterday different methods of illustrating momentum using ChatGPT and AI, and I think these wheels are one of the best things to show it. So how do you build momentum is actually that when you are making a small wheel working well, then it can actually start moving a bigger wheel and a bigger wheel and so forth. And this is very often what the investors can sniff. That depends how well you're running the process. Is your machine likely going to work out? And it's not only on the fundraising, but everything that you build. It's very easy to actually look at that. Is the likelihood something that you're going to succeed or not? And the same thing goes for sales, that it's very often a momentum game. So you need to build all the steps in such a way that the buyer is willing, or they trust that the thing that you're selling to them is working. And it's a lot of different steps that you need to be getting really good at. So how to build the momentum? What are the important steps in the fundraising process? Well, first of all, it's a process, and preparing, being good at all of these steps. You don't need to be perfect, but you need to look at very good at them. What I mean by this is that when you start building your process, it's really good that you have you show that you have been doing your pre-work already in each step. And for example, contacting the investors, that you have been already knowing something about the investor. You don't go there basically just shouting out that, hey, okay, are you investing into this type of things, or you don't know anything about the investors, you go too early contacting them, or that the mail that you send to them, it's unprofessional, it doesn't tell what the investor needs to do. The same way you can basically be unprepared in the discussions, and they send the message to the investors that you're not prepared. Most likely you will have other issues in different parts of your process. And this very often just gets the investors feeling of your process and your way of working. They lose the interest because there's just something that they have a gut feeling that this will not work out. So it's important just to prepare these steps into good enough condition. And one of other important thing here is that do it also in batches. What I mean by this is that very often I see startups that they try to, they find a one investor, they contact that instantly, then they start to discuss and hope that they get into a term sheet. But when you start to build a process, if you build the process only for a single instance, it's very hard to actually, or you tend to go really fast forward without actually preparing. Are you contacting them from the right angle? Are you having good materials on each step? So preparing it in batches makes much more effective your work and the reasons why you're building all the process around it. So for example, when you're preparing a short list of investors, when you're researching investors, try to aim to have there at least the minimum 20 investors, rather 50 investors and so forth. And when you start to contact those, I suggest that contact at least 5 at the same time. So you get actually a batch going in. And at the same time, when you go, why do you do this? Is that if you start contacting one by one, you will end up in the best case in one term sheet. And if you end up in one term sheet, that's kind of situation, that's a positive situation in many cases, but it's also that you don't have any comparables at. So you should have enough volume in the start part of your funnel that you could aim at least getting 3 to 5 term sheets so you can choose from. And the same naturally goes into different steps that you shouldn't be discussing with a single investor only, because then you have hard time to compare the output of the investors. So what this actually will make the batch process, and going back to the momentum, when you start to build this in batches, it will make you more confident. So when you know that when you're contacting, for example, the first investor or the first 5, you know that if they say no, you have more investors that you can contact. And this way, you become more confident that the first no's are not going to turn you down when you know that you have still more bullets left. And the second thing definitely is that you have comparables. So when the investors are giving you feedback, you don't need to instantly start adjusting your process on the first feedback that you get. But if the first 5 says no to you, and you have done your homework that they should be interested, that starts to tell you statistically significant. But if you contact 5 investors, 1 says no and 4 says yes, then you know that you're on the right track. So that's why also try to have there a little bit of volume when you go in steps forward. Finally, one of the important thing about this is that when you're doing this in batches, you're able to create a process timeline without faking it. What I mean by this is, well, I'll give you an example of the process timeline and why this is important. So for example, when you're sending a outreach message to investors, you tell what you're doing, what's your MRRs and so forth. But at the end of the message, what you should be doing and what helps confidence in your process to the investors is that you can ask them that, hey, if this is something that catches the investors' appetite, they want to discuss more, can they indicate their initial interest by next week, Friday? So give them roughly 10 days of time. And this way, what you can build is basically show to the investors that you're running the process. And the investors knows that, okay, you expect something from them. It shows that you're knowing the investor side process and you're polite to them at the same time. And this will put you showing that you're in control of the process. And naturally what this tells is to the investor that, okay, you're building a process around it. So this introduction is only the first part of your process. And you know already that the next step that you're wanting to do is to have a discussion with them. So you indicate with this type of things that you know what you're doing and you're building a process around it. When you communicate to investors, don't only think about your product, but how do you move the funnel all the time forward. So for example, when you contact investors, just say them that, okay, can you reply in the next 10 days? Give roughly 2 weeks. It's way more than enough, but something that it's realistic-ish and short enough that you can keep your process going forward. And then on the next steps, well, the discussion dates, negotiations will last longer, but there you can plan yourself that it will take anything from 1 month to 2 months. But what you can do in all of the steps in discussions, so when investors are having the first meetings with you, having the follow-on meetings, you can always ask about what's the next step and trying to keep it as short as possible. So you keep the ball rolling and keep the investors committed in your process. And naturally, what you can communicate during the process is that you aim to close the round by X months. And when you have a batch process, what this means is that you don't need to fake timelines. You don't need to start showing, basically, you don't need to be building fake sense of urgency, but clearly communicating that, hey, we're doing this outreach for a lot of investors, and for the next 2 weeks, we're starting to get who's interested. Then you're running the discussions on the ones that are interested, and hopefully you're able to close the round in a couple of months. So overall, when you're driving the process, so that you know what you're doing, so be confident, but at the same time, be humble and collaborative. So if you would put, for example, what I get a lot of too fast, arrogant communication, for example, that somebody asking, can you reply by today? Or we want to close this, somebody's reaching out to me this week and we want to close this round next Monday. No, I'm not going to depart my money on few days. So that you know the other side, especially without triggering the bullshit meter. And what we mean by this bullshit meter, it's instantly what the investors are really great at sniffing is that when you try to fake it. That's basically how you should be kind of communicating the overall round. But then what extra to do in different steps? Well, let's start to look at more in detail it from the start. So starting to contact the investors. And before we go into that, I wanted to actually start discussing how the funnel looks from the investor's point of view. For this, so yes, Stefan's questions, is it important to get that one-on-one meeting? Yes, that's one of the first goals that you need to get to discuss with the investors. But how do you get to discuss with the investors? It's important to look at what the investors are doing before they are having the meetings. So the typical funnel of an investor looks something like this. So if they invest roughly in 1% of the startups that they see, some are even investing in 0.1 of the startups that they see. If the investors are getting 500 requests to review per year, if you start to think about the time spent, and if the investors would be spending here 15 minutes per startup, it would be something like 3-4 months of work just by reviewing the decks, and they would not get anything actually done. So what the investors naturally want to do is to screen really fast the top of the funnel, and then start to think about, okay, what startups they really want to evaluate more deeply, and maybe they see or meet 15%, 20% out of the startups that actually are pitching to them. And then it drops dramatically the amount that they spend more time with. And this is important for you to understand. How do you get to that meeting? Well, you need to be first getting to their through their funnel, through their filters, pre-screen filters and evaluation filters. What that practically means is that the first things that the investors are looking is that does the startup fit to the fund's thesis? And what I mean by this is we're told a lot that you need to tell a story, but the investors actually, the first thing that they're not wanting to spend time on your story. So don't try to get 15, 20 minutes of their time, because if they're not investing in that geography or in that industry, although they love stories, they don't want to spend their time on stories that they will not invest into. So one of the first things they do is just to check that, do you fit to their thesis? So the industries, the locations, the stages, all this. So it needs to be very clear that it's worth opening the deck. It's worth actually taking more time to evaluate it. And then the second thing is starting to be, does this excite us? So if it fits to our fund, is there something that excites us that we should be starting to spend more time on it? And if yes, then it starts to be a lot about the founders. So can you actually do it? And when the founder evaluation starts from there, and naturally the rest of the part is really much about finding other red flags. So looking at the competition, is this solution really competitive? What is the market trends like? But all the time also evaluating the founders. And your job is really get to the end step by step, or disqualify that as early as possible. So it's also for not only from the investor's point of view important, but also from your point of view is disqualify unfit investors as early as possible, because you're just wasting time and you're not going to get into the term sheet if you know that you're not fitting to their investment thesis. So getting to the first meeting, what's the best practices for that? Well, first of all, as said, the investors are plotted by pitches. And what we actually look at data from our platform is that the investors, there's something saying that they spend 20 or 2-3 minutes on the per deck. But what we notice is that in the first step, in the pre-screening, they're mainly spending 40 seconds on that, if they even open the decks. So in our platform, they open, but the emails, we don't know. And after that pre-screening, they might start to spend more time, which is roughly 7 minutes per deck that they're interested in. So this is why they do this. And when we started to look at what they do in their decks, deck reading, so they don't read the problem and solution, but they skim them through and go through pages 11, 12, and so forth, and try to disregard the case as fast as possible. Why they do that is simply that they don't want to spend that time on reading the deck if it's not fitting to their thesis. So they want to know the countries, they want to know is it on the right states and so forth. If it fits to their thesis, then they start to spend more time around the deck. What you should be doing in the first meeting and getting there, you should be making sure that you get the investors' attention and making it really sure that it's worth opening your email, opening your message, and opening your deck, by telling that for sure you are fitting to the fund thesis, and also that not only that you're fitting to the fund thesis, but there's something that excites the investor. So there's something exceptional in your startup. So how to do this in practice is, before you expect or even the investors to open your deck, make sure that your introductory message, your first message, has these key points already. So here first, that the investor gets instantly what you're doing and how it fits to the investor's thesis. So making AI, I just made up this example, but making AI to select best fitting food for dogs. And the market is growing and the investor has been making investment in that space before. So it's easy to relate as an investor. For example, here, that if the investor is not investing in AI, good, I can ditch this instantly. And it's also important for you that, okay, if the investor is not investing in AI, drop it. So then you know that you're in the wrong prospect. You're not touching the right investors. The second is excite something. So if you're just doing something in the space, but why do I put you on top? Try to highlight if you have growth and traction, MRR. So like we discussed in last webinar, the more you have quantifiable stuff, the better, but try to find out what's exceptional in your case. And it can be the MRR, it can be growth, it can be that the market is expanding rapidly, you have user numbers or so forth, but that needs to come in a very clear, concise way from the message through. And this will make them to actually open the deck that, hey, you're fitting to their thesis and there's something that excites them. Naturally, in the end, then just so that you know what you're doing. And this way you start with the best positive way of actually showing that you know the investor side, and you build the first step of the first small wheel of your machine and starting to get the momentum going forward. And if I would get this type of message, I would instantly know that most likely this message goes to 10 other investors which are in this sector, and they will open it as well. So this is something that will most likely get momentum. So I would most likely reply in that 10 days to get to the train. So maybe as a brief recap, catch their attention by showing something exceptional and you fit to the fund thesis, make it very clear what you do, and communicate the timeline and the process in a collaborative manner. And always add these things if you have them. So make sure that you tell the traction numbers, revenues, user or growth if you have them. If you don't have revenues and growth, then user numbers, or if you're pre-revenue, pre-users, confirmed pilots, anything tangible. The earlier you are, the less you have this, but anything tangible, anything quantifiable. If you don't have any of this, it's very hard to kind of build why you're good to evaluate at this point. But then you can have that, okay, you have been getting other significant investors, you have been able to convince somebody already that this is a good case, or you have people committed already into this round. You don't have existing investors, but others have been committing into the round. And finally, if you have some exceptional startup history or domain background showing that you know how to build this. This is very important. So the investors are the buyers, and as with any buying process, try to make it easy for them. So one of the things, get to the point, forget the fluff. What I get a lot of is this kind of trying to go asking for feedback, or all this hopefully this email gets you well, and then it's yada yada yada. I try to kind of need to read a lot of stuff and not getting to the point what I want to hear and what's important. So try to forget the fluff and be concise. But at the same time, don't be arrogant. So be friendly, collaborative. You want to be partnering with the investor for a long time. Don't ask for time or feedback when you don't need it. What I mean by this is that if you know that the investor can evaluate your case by written message, don't ask for a 15-minute call. Hey, do you want to hear your pitch? Well, couldn't you just write it already at this stage? And also this, that could you give feedback to our pitch? Well, if I get 500 decks, I'm not able to give feedback on all of the decks that I get during the week. Neither the other investors are. So it just simply doesn't work out. If you don't hear from the investors, follow up a few times with them, but just accept that not all investors will reply, and just move forward. And here it comes back to the batch process and sales funnel. Just knowing that you have more ammunition, you don't whine on if somebody doesn't reply. Just move forward, do a couple of follow-ups, but then that's it, and try to focus on the ones that are working with you. And there's a lot of reasons why the investors will not reply, but if they don't, well, they don't. That's their pity. Yeah, naturally, I just showed you an example of a direct approach when you don't have a warm intro or anything that can introduce you. But still, all the same details are important when you're conducting even your direct network or the warm intros. Make sure that they know those topics. and prioritize naturally that try to get your direct network at first to contact them, because you have the best access to them. But if they don't know exactly where you are, or that you know somebody from a fund, but you know that person is not the one dealing with the team, make that pitch so that they can forward it to the relevant people in their team. Or if you're asking somebody to do a warm intro, make that person who's doing the warm intro, make sure that they will relay the right message to the investors. So thus you still need to do or provide the content, and don't hope that somebody in your network who does the warm intro will introduce you in the right manner. So make it also easy for the people who are doing the introductions. Just going or showing one email or a LinkedIn I got yesterday, an example. Sorry, this is in Finnish, but I got this yesterday, and I think this is a kind of great example of pros and cons, what works out well. So this bloke contacted me with first saying of a good friend of mine and another investor that somebody has been giving my name. So started with a good point that, okay, somebody that I trust has been giving my name. Okay, that might be one of the things that I'm expecting, that at least this Ilkka, who has been referred first, he didn't do the introduction, but most likely he has been giving at least my name. So something legit here. What they're doing, then he's telling quite clearly what they're doing. So they're doing a way of getting rid of spam phone calls. And not only that, I, as a receiver of a lot of spam phone calls, I get a lot of them, and I really know the problem. So they hit the nail really well. And he explains what they're doing. So I'm very interested about that. And then what he starts to ask is basically, okay, they're doing something. He's asking a time for me to actually present more the technical solution. And I'm like, he's asking time for me. So the start is very good. But then the actual ask is time, which I was kind of, no, can't you actually send me a deck? What I replied to him is actually, I replied a message or how my phone book a couple of days back looked like in my phone. So he really hit the nail that I have the problem that he's calling. So this is how my phone very often looks like, that I just get a lot of spam and I don't answer the phone anymore because of just this simple situation. But so he hit the nail. I understand the problem. Very good start in that sense, very positive. So the momentum started. But the cons, it really didn't excite me. So there's nothing, he's solving a problem. And actually the guy, when I started to look at more, he has a startup background. He could have been doing a lot of telling that at what part they are, do they have traction, what's the market size, something more to get it exciting. That is this something big that they're doing. And definitely asked my time too early, that do I want to have that call to actually know more? He's asking exactly time that he's trying to solve, that he knows that we're spammed by stuff. And I think this started to kind of get it off. Well, anyway, this continues a little bit. I asked that, okay, can I get a deck from you? He replied, yes. And now it's 24 hours later and still don't have the deck. So I think this is a good example of a momentum. Started with really well, but then, okay, I don't know now, does he have a deck even ready? At what stage it is? I'm waiting. So I don't know how this will go forward, and will he behave the same way with other clients, so forth. So it went down the momentum instantly with this. Might be that it's a great case. He can still recover it. I will read the deck. But just a good example when the momentum goes down easily. And this is the reason why to prepare. So when an investor asks for a deck and is interested, make sure that you can reply as fast as you can. That's the first part, couple of tips there. So you got to the meeting then. Oh, sorry, I'm running out of time. I didn't notice that. I'll start to rush through a little bit the latter part of the session. So the first meeting, then you have gotten there. So you're sure that at this point, the fund already knows that you are fitting to their thesis. You're in the right country, you're in the right states, and so forth. So they're not spending time for you with you to learn that you're not in the right country or so forth. So all these kind of pre-checks are done at that point. So now it's really about making sure that what they saw in the message, what they saw in the deck, does that excite them more? And then it starts to be about you founders. So can you really pull it off? Can you keep the excitement up? And the first meeting is, well, exactly making the investors excited enough to invest more time, not to invest money, but more time to evaluate your case. So first meetings are really about just presenting the case, and is it something that you want, or what you learned from the deck, what you learned from the message, is it something that you want to evaluate more deeper? So the investors will not give you money out of the first meeting, but they will need to have more consideration time, do a due diligence before they're going to participate on the round. So make sure that you're just doing that and not trying to close the round too early at the first meeting. And what you should be doing here is, for example, if you're doing it with the VC, or if you're doing it with the angel, you can ask actually how they want to run the calls. They have a typical way of how they want to do it. The pitch deck, naturally be prepared that you pitch to them based on your deck, but they might have a different preference, and you can openly ask them that how they want to do the introductory call. Some wants to know that, okay, tell your story, how did you come up with it? Very often it's about the team and evaluating that, are you the ones actually solving the problem, and is the market enough? Is the things that they found it in the deck really true? But ask it from the other side and keep it conversational. And also make sure that, again, back to this process, that be prepared to ask questions from the investors. So for example, what's the investment process like from here? So making sure that you know, again, their timeline, and what's the timeline that you're expecting, so that you can start to commit into that. Are they doing a next decision on next week, or how fast they can go forward with you? Keeping the timeline and the ball moving forward. And also about the fund. So make sure that you have been doing your research. How do they make decisions? What type of support they give? You can go thinking of, for example, taking examples. If you find a portfolio company that is close by, you can ask more detailed questions. That can they tell examples of how they have been collaborating with them, so that you have been doing your research, and don't show it in a way that you did the research, but ask questions that are relevant to the process and adds value to yourself. In the first meeting, a couple of other things. I think it's important that you share only the deck, maybe some small added material, but try to keep it on the deck. So access to data room, financial model, all this can be shared later if the investor confirms that they want to dig deeper. But don't overload them with information, because they don't need it. And at the same time, this gives you more ammunition that you don't go empty-handed on the next meeting. So you can start to give them bit by bit more information. And what else? Keep your answers short and to the point. So don't start to sidetrack in stuff that is not relevant from the investor's point of view, because they also try to think about how it's to work with them, answer to the questions, and don't try to sidetrack into irrelevant stuff. And so avoid also jargon, sidetracking. And I think this, going back to the questions, ask relevant questions. And unfortunately, there is a lot of stupid questions, very basic questions, or the questions are completely off. It kind of tells me that, okay, try to figure out that the questions that you're asking is actually relevant to you. You know that information. If you're asking too early questions, it also relays the information that you don't actually know what you're doing. And end the call with clear next steps. So with deadlines there, that okay, what's the next steps and when it's going to happen? Is it something that is expected from you? Most likely it's not. It's something that the investors should be coming back, that are they interested to go forward with you or not? The next step. So if they say yes, it's on these 3 topics, and your job is mainly to keep the momentum going on. So you know already that there's something exciting after the first meeting, and you still need to keep that excitement up. And then they just start to basically go through that, can you do it? So there starts to be more questions. You start to go deeper into your plans, into your go-to-markets, whatever you're doing using the money. They are evaluating basically you, that are you the one, and is the team the ones that can do it? So it's about keeping your momentum and showing that you are actually able to nail the race. And if you're able to nail the race, most likely you're able to build also the startup there. And they go very often hand in hand. Are you able to build stuff and in an effective manner? And naturally what they're looking, there can be that other things that will kill the case, other red flags like the competition is too high or the market is small or so forth. There can be the other red flags, but it's mainly about the founders and how you behave with the questions that the investors ask. So I think ending with this, how to keep the momentum, reply fast, be prepared to dive deep, but don't dive deep if nobody's asking. So that's one of the other things that I'm noticing. Don't go sidetracking topics if they are not interested. Final thing, be prepared also for this. So I think this example that I gave now, that most likely he's doing something important stuff, replying for customers and so forth. But well, he contacted me, asked for my time, and then it seems that he doesn't have time to send me a deck. Expect this fundraising to be a full-time job. Well, you might, hopefully it's a short time period that you're doing it. So that's why to run it in batches, that it doesn't extend into 6 months, 9 months. But it's very likely that's going to happen. So it's going to take a lot of time there. One of the things I still wanted to say out loud, what we have been doing during the webinars and what started to work out is we started to do some bit of assignments and consulting for startups, and realized that we do it really well. So more and more what we're doing these webinars, more and more we were asked, how can we help running the rounds? So if you're interested in more detailed consulting for your company, yes, this works quite nicely. And how we have been preparing this based on the whole process that we are building. The first things that we do with startups is just simply assess the fundability. So if you're interested in help on the whole of the round, we can do that. But the way that we have been running this is simply that first thing that we do with the startups is assessing the current fundability. So going through the framework that we have, problem solution, market competition, and then mapping the financial assumptions, mapping a finance roadmap there, that does this make sense for investors? And if yes, then we can start helping preparing the raise. So defining the pitch, preparing the decks, doing the whole investor list part. And final part, that when that's done, all the preparation is done, we can help on contacting the investors, keeping your CRMs organized and so forth. So if this is something that you're interested, feel free to reach out to me. We start to be really effective on that. And the more we're looking at the data coming out from our platform, it just tells what works and what not. Next week, continuing on. So hopefully close the round, what to do after you've raised. So what are the typical things that you need to be focusing after the raise? I'll thank again all of you for joining. Hopefully seeing you next week again. Thanks all.